So we are back with a new episode of Around the Horns, and we have a very special guest today, Mr. Mike Rooney, Coach Mike Rooney, or Runes, as you may know him. He's the one of the top writers for D1 Baseball. You might have seen him from the ESPN broadcast Squeeze play during the postseason, and the bucket hat aficionado. So thanks for
This
joining
is
me.
so I'll take bucket hat aficionado. That's very accurate. Now, top writer for D1 Baseball. I would say I am the utility infielder, outfielder of the D1 writing team. But Fitzy coaches me up, and Aaron, the great Aaron Fitt, and it is fun working with those guys. And of course, Kendall, the great Kendall Rogers, is Mr. Scoop. But it's a blast working with those guys. But yeah, top writer, you're being too kind, too generous there.
Well, thanks for joining the show. We wanted to do a little bit of a different episode this week, having you on and just kind of shift gears as we're in the dog days of summer before we get into fall ball, and talk about where the state of baseball is and kind of some of the hot topics around conference realignment, which is a very real thing, especially as it relates to Texas, and get your thoughts on what's going on. So
whew, man, it's a big net you just threw out there, right? I'd say I'm probably like a lot of people that love college baseball, yourself included, where, man, it's just a lot to take in right now. Like ever since Omaha has been a whirlwind, we've got a lot going on right now. You've got, hey, the College World Series was an all-time great College World Series, star power. The ratings were off the charts. It was incredible. So in the short term, the sport is really, really growing. But I'd say there's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of angst. The instant combination of NIL and the transfer portal has been really a lot for people to handle, myself included. Now that said, I have to remind myself that if you look at, we did this recently, looked at the college national team, which in theory is the best players that will play college baseball next year. There were 31 players, and only 3 of the 31 ended up in the transfer portal. So, even though very famous players like a Chase Burns or a Braden Montgomery or a Luke Holman, et cetera, it feels like everybody's in the portal. That's actually not true. And NIL is a lot to get used to right now. Conference realignment is bonkers. So yeah, like I think, I'm encouraged by what has happened in college baseball. Hey, LSU and Florida play in that final game, and we had 3.6 million viewers. So, squeeze play, which is basically synonymous with our NCAA tournament, record views and all. My bosses at ESPN continue to reiterate how thrilled they are with the NCAA baseball tournament. But, I'd be lying if I didn't say, Zach, that I feel concerned. Like I worry about, I don't worry about the state of college baseball. I worry about where we're headed. Now, worrying about something doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to go poorly. It's a lot of change at one time. And I do believe in the law of unintended consequences. And I don't even think we know what the unintended consequences are right now. So sorry about the ramble there, and we can unpack any of those things specifically. I've got thoughts on all of them, but it's a lot right now. It's a lot.
Yeah. So staying with, just the conference realignment piece for a moment, unintended consequences, I think, is a really good word to describe what's going on in terms of the big money is obviously in football. That's what drives all of this conversation. No one's going, I'm changing conferences because my baseball team is not where it should be operating, right?
Right.
And I think there's been a couple of coaches, not Brian Kelly, but UCLA.
Chip Kelly. Yeah, Chip Kelly.
Chip Kelly. I think he had some really good points. Like,
agreed.
Look, you have to look at it in these silos. You can't look at it as across the board. Do you have the same thoughts around there could be some serious unintended consequences long term, especially looking at West Coast.
Yeah.
Washington, UCLA, all of them moving across.
It's ridiculous, right? Like I would say this, see, like the current setup outside of the SEC, ironically, but for every league not named the SEC, the current, like these new contracts that have been signed that'll take us to around 2030. Yeah. Completely unsustainable from an Olympic sport standpoint. Unsustainable. Like we are kidding ourselves if we think that the Big Ten can have a league with 4 schools literally on the West Coast, and every other school is east of Nebraska. That's ludicrous, right? For volleyball, swimming, track, baseball, tennis. I mean, even basketball, it's ridiculous. So, I think we're going to have to figure out these next 6 years, but it's going to change again. The SEC is kind of like the one league that's got the perfect combination of they're going to have great money. It actually does make regional sense. The ACC makes great regional sense, but because they don't have the money, they've got complete unrest within their own body, right? I mean, you can't go a week without someone in the hierarchy at Florida State saying we want out, right? It's like a weekly bulletin. So I think that it's not sustainable. I'm with you. Like Eli Drinkwitz from Missouri said something similar, like, can't we just carve out football and do something more sustainable for the, let's be honest, do something more sustainable for the non-revenue sport. So I think, I don't know where all this goes. It's going to be very, very interesting because, hey, the sport we care about, baseball, is in a weird place. Is baseball revenue sport? Sort of.
Kind
Like,
of, yeah.
yeah, like, hey, we're the NCAA is about to sign, their Olympic sports contract with ESPN is up at the end of this year. I've heard one media expert say that an ESPN might pay $50 million for for the NCAA baseball tournament. Now, just to be clear, like, that's just somebody spitballing a number, right? But either way, that's not, quarters in your couch cushions, right? Like, that's real money. And the SEC schools make real money in college baseball, but there are many other schools where baseball is a sunk cost. So I don't know. It's conference realignment. I just think the one thing we can count on is that there's going to be future changes. But I think your point's well taken, Zach, that in the meantime, we got to figure out the next 6 years. And I just think about, as we are recording this podcast, Stanford and Oregon State, who literally a year ago, were the number 2 and number 3 national seeds in our tournament, are homeless athletic departments. Oregon State has 3 national titles since 2006. That leads the country. Stanford has gone to 3 straight Omahas. That leads the country. Those are homeless baseball programs right now. And that is, unthinkable is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, the Stanford one is a really unique situation, considering that you look at the overall athletics program. You have a program like Cal, who tried to do away with their baseball program. You have to also worry, in my mind, about some of these programs going, you know what, this is just too much, and let's simplify. Let's bring everything back into house and figure out what's actually important. And not saying Stanford's going to do that. I think they have a long history and they're never going to get rid of baseball. But gosh, I think some of those are definitely waving in the wind. Staying in the couple of parts of the country you're very familiar with, Arizona State moving into the Big 12. You mentioned the SEC being kind of that perfect scenario. Big 12 went from somewhat left for dead when Texas and OU leaves to suddenly, from a baseball standpoint, they look really, really strong now because they kind of have a consolidated middle of the country basis with some pieces out on the West Coast, West Virginia on the East Coast, and they're kind of touching everywhere now. So I think they have a strong future as well.
Yeah, I think our good friend Kendall Rogers has said this many times, that through all of this, the league that really got substantially stronger in baseball is the Big 12, as you mentioned. Now, like, there's already rumblings coming out of the, Arizona State, particularly, where they've said, this is a school that really cares about college baseball. And they've said, hey, like, are we really going to West Virginia for baseball? Now they've kind of tried to retract that politely since then. But, long story short, the Big 12 as an aggregating conference got better in baseball, right? I mean, brands like Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, Arizona State, Arizona. I mean, yeah, like there's a lot of good baseball programs in that league once the transition happens.
Yeah.
It's not super symmetrical. Like, we did an exercise on one of our D1 baseball podcasts where we tried to create divisions for the Big 12, and it ain't easy, right?
Yeah.
It's like you've got your West sort of division, and then you've got your East sort of division. So they're going to have to get creative. And hey, as we're recording today, there's rumors and whispers that could the Big 12 reopen their doors to the 4 remaining Pac-12 schools. Who knows what's going to happen? But you're right. Like the Big 12, adding Arizona and Arizona State, and they're already adding a program like UCF, which is always intriguing. Houston is an always intriguing college baseball program. Cincinnati seems like a mismatch, but Jordan Bischel, who came from Central Michigan, he's great. Their new head coach. So there's a lot to get excited about there, and that one's interesting.
For the Big Ten, they bring in two really, historical programs in UCLA, multiple national championships. Obviously, USC has the most ever, granted they were a number of years ago, but do they instantly come in and really kind of alter the landscape of the Big Ten in terms of what that looks like? Because the Big Ten has also lost some of their top head coaches to, other rival schools and conferences in the past couple of years. So
yeah, I think that's a question that's top of mind for me. And I want to say this clearly. I have great respect for the Big Ten institutions. Like the Big Ten are some of the best academic institutions in the world.
Yeah.
We've got a great set of baseball coaches there. They continually produce good players. They've got excellent facilities for the most part. Weather is obviously a huge issue that they deal with. We can't change that. But as a conference, the Big Ten has not emphasized baseball ever. They haven't. I could make an argument that over the course of let's say it this way: the Big Ten and college baseball have a complicated relationship. So the question becomes: do UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington, who are very good programs, do they come in and they lift the Big Ten in baseball? Like, do those four help the Big Ten be better in baseball? Or I think we have to prepare ourselves. Does the Big Ten hurt those West Coast programs? Because again, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC, their primary recruiting bases are the West Coast, and specifically California.
Yeah.
And how many, we don't know yet. I've been asking, but no one's really got good answers yet. It's too soon. But how will this affect those four schools recruiting? Do California kids want to play in the Big Ten? Only time will tell. Hey, the academic ones, I think, could potentially be thrilled. But I think if you're Jason Kelly at Washington or Mark Wasikowski at Oregon, John Savage, Andy Stankiewicz at the SoCal schools, that's a little concerning. Is like, hey, how do I feel when in recruiting? How does this play out? I think it's going to be very curious. Now, here's the trump card in all this. The Big Ten is going to have crazy money. And so if they choose to prioritize baseball, and their new commissioner, Tony Petitti, it comes from MLB, he's got a baseball background.
Yeah, baseball guy.
If the Big Ten chooses to prioritize baseball, all bets are off. And that could get really exciting really quickly. Here's the one, fly in the ointment I see. The Big Ten as a league sponsors more sports than any other conference in the country. They sponsor a ton of sports. And so it's a lot of mouths to feed. We'll see. I mean, that will be very interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts there too. You think about NIL and continuing draft trends. You see a ton of Cali kids leaving. I mean, TCU loaded on California kids. Texas, they still have the Tulo effect. They still have Augie effect. They've got Steve Rod out there. I mean, they're bringing in more and more kids from California and growing that base. And then you think about the Midwest in general, and talking to Dustin McComas and Drew Bishop of Five Tool. Look, some of the Midwest schools look like some of the best teams at the area codes.
Yep.
And you see Vanderbilt and even Texas, they've got kids from Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Michigan, Kansas. I mean, they're going to the Midwest. And so if that base really starts kind of coming out from underneath them, that could be really big trouble if they don't put that investment like you talk about. So,
yep. Yeah. And it's already happened, right? Like everything you just, a lot of what you mentioned is past tense, that the California kids are leaving with more frequency. I mean, I think in the last 2 years, in the 22 season and the 23 season, the SEC West has had at least, or the SEC has had at least 4, if not 4 or 5, California-born shortstops in the league at any one time. So those kids are, they're leaving. I just was at the Perfect Game All-American game because it was in Phoenix, which is local for me. And I mean, there were 3 really good players from LA, all committed to Texas. Yeah. So, it was jarring to see those SoCal kids just, jetting out of there in recruiting. So it'll be, to your point, it'll be very interesting.
Yeah. speaking of recruiting, obviously massive step that the NCAA took in allowing that third paid assistant. What are your thoughts? Do you think 11.7 goes away at any time, or is NCAA going to say, well, you've got NIL now, you use that to really kind of stave off the masses, right?
Yeah, I think that, and that's a frustration for me with the NCAA is that, so your question is more specific, like what happens with 11.7 scholarships? I actually think it's a little bit irrelevant right now
Yeah.
because, there's so much money out there. This is the positive, right? There's so much money out there for baseball families, meaning there's Alston money. That's like walk-ons at SEC schools are getting Alston money. I mean, that's almost $6,000 a year. And if you showed financial aid, financial need, you could get a Pell Grant, etc. But again, that's walk-ons. That's non-scholarship kids getting the Alston money. NIL money is a complete deal breaker where you can give a kid 25% scholarship and then just do everything else via NIL. So and it takes me to the bigger picture where the third paid assistant, let's be honest, I think it probably passed because a lawsuit was created. That's often the catalyst. And I think that's what I worry about college sports is college baseball is this growing entity. It's this really cool enterprise. And at the end of the day, the college, if you ask me who's in charge of college baseball, who's in charge of college sports, we're a little bit of a headless horseman because who's really in charge of college sports are the university presidents, and man, are their plates full. If you grab the college Michael Crow at Arizona State, and you asked him, hey, where does baseball scholarship stack on your list of priorities? I mean, we'd be lucky to be in the 200s for him, right? Like, so that part is frustrating for me. I think the bigger issues for college baseball are things like roster sizes, thing like access to the postseason, because my guiding principle right now, Zach, in college baseball, not that I'm in charge, but I've got opinions, of course, is this: we can't ever do something in college baseball that punishes the SEC for caring about college baseball too much. We can't do that. Like, that's not the growth of college baseball. We owe a lot to the SEC. Like, it's an awesome thing. SEC baseball, the kids don't want to play SEC baseball because of a bunch of propaganda. It's legitimately awesome, right? Like the crowds, the facilities, the coaching, the opportunities, etc. I mean, the network, it's incredible. So we can't punish the SEC because they love college baseball too much. However, we can't let the SEC suffocate the rest of college baseball either. And what I mean by that is the SEC runs so far out in front of everybody else that athletic directors across the country start looking at baseball like, whatever, what's the point, right? I guess that's the best way to say it is we don't want ADs across the country looking at baseball like saying, what's the point? Like, I could dump X amount of dollars into it and the SEC is just going to dump 15X of that on there. So we're just going to run it almost like an intramural program. And, I'm being maybe a little bit dramatic there, but I think that's the thing we have to think about is, I referenced this to somebody recently. In 2019 in softball, 13 out of 13 SEC schools made the NCAA tournament, all 13. And I want to be clear here, like, softball is on an incredible trajectory, but if we wake up 5 years from now, Z, and we've got 16 out of 16 SEC baseball schools have made our NCAA tournament, that will feel very scary to me. Like, I feel like that borderline delegitimizes your sport because you're basically saying now the regular season doesn't matter for that league. It's the conference season. Like, you could do whatever and everybody's in. I don't know. I'm rambling now, but
I feel like we started down that road this year when everyone is saying, does the SEC get 8 hosts, right? I mean, already people were like, whoa, hold on. Like, you're middle of the pack there. And it's a much better league. It's a much tougher league, but where do we start to draw some barriers and kind of pull back and say, well, they're a conference champion, or they, have a much better record and much better, success throughout the season. And what does that look like vis-a-vis? And so,
it's eye popping, right? Like what you just said, there are 16 host sites. There are 30 conferences, 30. And of the 16 sites, we were this close from having 9 of the 16 sites come from one 14-team league. I mean, think about how, now again, the 8 sites that were awarded the SEC, I'm here to tell you that I think that all 8 schools absolutely deserve to host. Now,
Yeah.
this is a reason why I'm a proponent of the 32 host, idea. That's not my idea, but it's one that I love. But all that said, yeah, it's again, how do we thread that needle where we let the SEC just continue to drive growth in college baseball without letting them run so far away that we start to lose interest in the sport.
Yeah. So same thought process, different track than mid-major programs, with NIL, with transfer portal. At some point, they almost become the feeder squads or the old JUCO, right? Where it's just, we're sending our kids there because we know in 2 years, hey, great, if he ends up being what we think he could be, we'll just take him off their plate, right? And so,
right.
But we're also seeing a ton of mid-majors, East Carolina and what they've done, DBU's constantly knocking on the door, Southern Miss, Louisiana, even Texas State, just in the South region. But like, what are your thoughts on the mid-majors and what that kind of looks like going forward?
Yeah, I'm concerned, but it is like I feel like there are some mixed messages out there that are hard to parse through yet. I mean, we did just witness Oral Roberts go to Omaha, right, as a 4 seed. However, they did not play an SEC school on the way to Omaha, and that may, I'm not trying to like, I know that's going to be hard on some people's ears, but that's a factual statement, right? Like that they avoided the SEC on their way to Omaha. I'm concerned about, I was one of those people several years ago saying that, hey, my hope is that the portal will be a two-way street, meaning that, hey, Tommy White goes to LSU, but also, and that's probably a bad example, but like, a kid goes from a quote unquote smaller program to a bigger program, but also you'll see things like Josh Hatcher, who just can't quite get everyday playing time at Mississippi State. And he goes to Kennesaw State and he's a star and an All-American. He plays every day. Wyatt Hudepole this year at Charlotte goes from a reliever at Kentucky to Friday night starter at Charlotte. So, that was an encouragement for me. Here's one thing I'm concerned about now with the portal is that I look at, like, I'm gonna pick on Christian Little. And in fairness to Christian Little, like, this is me speaking for him, which is not my right to do. But I'm just going to speculate here for a second, right? Christian Little transferred from Vanderbilt to LSU. Okay, he's very high profile, very, very talented. The NCAA currently is taking a hard line on second-time transfers. First, one-time transfer, yeah. Christian Little is eligible right away at LSU. I would argue, I have no right to do this, but for hypothetical purposes, I'm going to do it. I would argue that what's best for Christian Little's career is to leave LSU and go somewhere where he knows he's going to get innings, right? Like, yeah, it's very conceivable that he would not pitch again at LSU this year. They are loaded. I mean, loaded. Now, hey, Christian Little could prove me wrong and he does great. And it's his choice to make. But here's my concern, that Christian Little doesn't have a choice to make because he's stuck, because he can't transfer. I think about Ben Napolt, who's a backup infielder at LSU, went from VCU. Same thing. Like, Ben Napolt could be super happy at LSU. He's got a national championship ring, as does Christian Little. That's great. But I'm concerned that he's staying at LSU not because he wants to, but because he's stuck. Now, again, just to be clear, I don't know that for a fact. I think about Drake Varnado, who went from Arkansas to Arizona State. Now he's at Lamar, where he would have an incredible opportunity to play. He's not eligible yet, right? Because it'll be his second transfer. So if you follow what I'm going there, is the portal becoming a one-way street? Like, we need it to be a two-way street, but I'm worried that it's becoming a one-way street and guys get stuck places. So, and again, I apologize for using specific names there. All 3 of those kids could be perfectly happy with their current setup. I don't know that. I'm just worried that choices are being made because we don't have choices, as opposed to because we think this is the best option.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's been really interesting because summer baseball used to be, hey, what's going on in the summer league? What, how's the Cape doing? How's the California League, Northwoods? And now it's, heck, even during Omaha, I mean, kids were literally transferring and announcing their intentions during the games in Omaha. And I was like, your team's still in Omaha. What the heck are you getting
Right.
transfers in? Like, you're crazy. But yeah, there's definitely kids that are getting stuck, and or the grass is always greener. Sometimes recruiting, MLB draft trends are the way they are. They're wanting to take college kids, and so more high school kids are ending up on campus, and maybe they've been passed over, or coaching changes, and now, like you said, they are stuck. There's a fine line of the unintended consequences, and what does this mean long term for the growth of baseball? Because in my opinion, you have to have some of those mid majors, because look, one of the things that draws attention and eyeballs is always going to be the story of Oral Roberts,
Mm-hmm.
or Fresno State coming out of nowhere to win it all. These are the things that help drive and grow the game. So
Yeah, and I think we do have to think about what's healthy for, again, getting back to that guiding principle. Like we have to allow the SEC to be in love with college baseball and grow, but at the same time, like what's healthy for the sport? Because I do worry about some of this stuff. Like I think about the college. I'm an over the top Notre Dame football fan. I watch every game religiously. I don't watch the college football playoff because I feel like it's just not for me. It's not for, and like again, I'm one fan, and maybe that's ratings would probably say that I'm the exception, not the rule. But hey, even Greg Sankey, who has no reason to expand the playoff, is looking at it like, hey, like even though my league, what's in the best interest of the SEC only would be, no, why would we expand the
yeah,
college football playoff, right? Like we dominate this thing. But for the good of the sport, I think that all makes sense because again, like all these different things, think about if you're a program that's a power program in college baseball right now, we have unlimited fall rosters. We have no salary cap anymore. We did have a salary cap of 11.7, sort of. We
yeah,
don't have that anymore. And I hear coaches saying that the gap between the air quotes mid majors and the power programs is widening. And that to your point a second ago, Zach, that concerns me. I don't know that that's healthy for the college baseball globally.
yeah. Thinking about college football playoffs, from an NCAA tournament expansion, rules change. We're 24, 25 years in now since super regionals were introduced. Do you see change on the horizon, or do you think that things need to be changed and altered to really continue to accelerate the growth and make it a more level playing field in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think access. So I wrote an article this summer that I was pretty passionate about. Not pretty, I was very passionate about on there's two concepts where we could tweak our postseason. Like, when the transformation committee comes out and says, hey, take the tournament to 96 teams, that doesn't feel comfortable for me. That's way too big.
Yeah,
But I tell you, like honestly, even though our tournament right now is thriving, right? Our NCAA baseball tournament is absolutely thriving. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm worried about access to the postseason. Like I do think 64 is too small. So the article I was alluding to, I basically took this year's tournament and I expanded it to 72 teams, and I did the 32 hosts because I do think the number one thing that gets athletic departments excited about our sport is hosting the postseason. And
yeah,
I'm worried that we're getting to a time where, like Indiana State hosted this year, and people were losing their minds over Indiana State hosting because they were 2-9 versus the top 50. And
yeah,
in my mind, it's like, hey, Boston College was this close to hosting a regional up in the Northeast on campus, which would have been amazing. So that's why I like the 32 hosts. Then everything would be a 3-game series. We could expand very easily to 72 teams with some playing games on Thursday nights.
yeah,
I've encouraged everyone to read the article just because I love the feedback and the discourse about it. But I don't think 72 teams is an obnoxious expansion of the tournament. I don't think like 32 hosts does not punish the SEC. As a matter of fact, it rewards the SEC.
yeah.
It would be more money for the NCAA, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm passionate about. I'm not interested in 96 teams. That seems like it would dumb it down. But I am worried. Like when I saw teams like UC Irvine, Santa Barbara, Arizona State, USC, Kansas State, I mean, et cetera, et cetera. Wofford, each of the last 2 years had 40-win teams that didn't get in. It's like, man, like we're leaving really good teams behind.
Yeah.
And I don't want to discontinue honoring automatic bids. You know, like I love some of the smaller leagues getting an automatic qualifier in there. So, you know, that I do think access to the postseason is something that if we're not careful, you know, to put a bow on it, Z, I mean, we were this close in, you know, if you're listening, I have my fingers very close together, this close to our national champion not making the field 2 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
there are many committees, many selection committees in the past that don't admit Ole Miss into the NCAA tournament. So, like, if that's not a vote, or if that's not a data point that says 64 is too small, I don't know what is. And you know, that we would have been robbed of one of the great stories in the last couple of decades in college baseball.
Yeah, and I mean, this will be very unpopular to the new Ole Miss brethren, but yeah, I wouldn't have admitted. Like, if you look at their schedule, if you look at what they did, it was like, oh my gosh. And in, you know, I also made the argument with some of my friends. I said, this was most disastrous, like, great storyline, love it, right? This is what draws eyeballs. At the same time, this was absolutely disastrous from a mid-major standpoint, because now going forward, it will always be, well, they're in the SEC, of course we're going to let them in, or they're in the Big 12, absolutely. We don't worry about Wofford, right?
Yeah.
Which only exacerbates what we were talking about with the transfer portal of, yeah, they're gonna cherry pick, of course. And I don't want to turn any kid away. Like, if a kid wants to come to Texas because he's hitting, you know, 600 at a mid-major, by all means, right? Like,
Yeah.
love to see it. But for the good of the game overall, you know, you also want to see some parity. And then to your point about the 72 teams, or, you know, 64 not being enough, it was interesting. It was talking to and listening to the guys doing the 11.7 podcast. And they were talking about how many automatic qualifiers there are, how many SEC teams are more likely to get in, you know, Big 12, ACC. And you're like, well, you've got a really, really small pool of teams that are actually then eligible. And it's like maddeningly small. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I think there has to be some kind of change growth wise, which, to your point, I don't want to see 96. That seems so
It's
far
kind of
excessive.
outrageous.
It's just,
Yeah, then like we would totally be making our regular season pointless, because
yeah,
like the ACC, the SEC, leagues like that, the Big 12 even, like you could just pencil 10 teams in. 72 is still like, you know, like there's still good teams being left on the cutting room floor. But, you know,
yeah,
again, this is where it's tricky, Zach, is that every professional sports league emphasizes parity, right? Like, they're not all on drugs, right? Like,
yeah,
these are smart people running professional sports leagues. They all think about parity. They all have instruments for parity. And I'm not saying we have to go crazy on that, but right now, because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, you know, because of a lot of different reasons, we have no instruments for parity right now in college baseball. We have unlimited fall rosters. We have unlimited NIL money. We have, you know, the transfer portal. So I'm just a little bit, as it sounds like you are, I'm a little bit anxious about the unintended consequences of just no guardrails in place there.
yeah. So, you know, before we let you go, just kind of going to put you on the spot going into the new year. I've seen some of the roster additions and what the MLB draft kind of shakeout's been. Do you have some favorites? I mean, I'm sure LSU's got to be up there with some of the weapons they've added. The rich get richer, right? And
Yeah.
Tennessee certainly didn't hurt themselves in the transfer portal again. So, who are some of the top teams and, you know, storylines you're looking forward to 2024?
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee is thriving. You're right. Like, you know, Tony Vitello is, you know, is one of the you could argue he's the most dynamic recruiting head coach we have in college baseball. You know, like, so it's like you can kind of take the SEC and, you know, Tennessee, you know, they're going to be good. Vandy, Florida, you know, like these teams are really thriving. I think LSU really has my attention. I don't think there's a program with more momentum than LSU right now. They have a 6-man transfer class that I think is probably the best in the country. Their freshman class, you think about how, you know, it's a top 10 class. They lost one player in the draft, just one. Not to mention that you return, you know, kids like Thatcher Hurd and Tommy White. I mean, they return a lot of guys.
Yeah.
You know, now I get it. They don't return Paul Skeens or Dylan Cruz, but they return a lot of really good players. You know, Texas, I thought, had an incredible offseason. I thought TCU did. I think TCU's found a really good groove in high school recruiting and the transfer situation, you know, the portal. Wake Forest has built on their momentum to get Chase Burns and Seaver King, who's a Division II transfer who made Team USA as a Division II player. I think Wake Forest continues to build on their momentum. So yeah, I mean, I think Virginia will be very, very good. I think that's a top 5 team too. Yeah, it'll be, and again, it'll be interesting to see the last year of the Pac-12 as we know it. Like that will be fascinating. But
Yeah.
for your listeners, man, I don't know that anybody had a better, LeBaron Johnson Jr. coming back for Texas, Tanner Wick coming back. It sounds like their incoming class did really well. I know they were aggressive in the transfer portal. I think David Pierce is arguably the most underrated coach in the country. I don't know whether that's just because, the previous coaches at Texas are kind of like movie star status.
Yeah.
And so, David Pierce is just someone who's really awesome at the job. But man, and Tulo coming back, that's really cool. I mean, yeah, Texas is, I thought they had a great offseason.
Yeah, it was very interesting because going into the offseason, it was, man, Texas is either going to lose a ton or they're going to return a ton. And as kind of things moved on and kept progressing, it was like, wow, like they're building something that they could have a really big year in terms of a deep run again. And, they were a one really bad play potentially away from actually upsetting Stanford out in the super regional out there and forcing some extra innings. But yeah, if Witt is truly back to his normal self, and he had some shaky starts up in the Cape for sure, but you got to think one of the best 2-1-2 punches in the weekend rotation. And then, I mean, everyone was kind of bemoaning the transfer portal, but they're like, well, have you seen what we're returning? We've got so many arms, and they brought in a 19-man freshman class because they're fit. They're not doing just, hey, the best player available. They're actually going for fit now, which is why they've had this kind of continued success. It's gonna be interesting to watch this fall because there's gonna be a lot of really good battles.
But and think about the trajectory. Like I think the program is so interesting, and you fact check me if I mess this up, Z. But so basically under David Pierce, Texas goes to Omaha 3 out of 4 years, and then that 1 year that's really weird is because they finished dead last and don't even qualify for the Big 12 tournament. So that's weird. The 2022 team was star laden, right? Like Ivan Melendez, Trey Faltini, Silas Ardoin. I mean, it was just who's the lefty I'm thinking of from California? Steve. I always want to say Hansen. I always want to say Pete Stevens, Pete Hansen. So like they were loaded, and then I thought for them to get that close to Omaha last year was one of the best coaching jobs in the country last year, because I thought Texas was like, they were that roster was not nearly as overwhelming as the one in 2022. And that Miami regional that they won was not a joke. I mean, I thought Miami was a legitimate Omaha contender, and Texas just went in there and, kind of took their lunch money. I mean, it was very impressive. And I know there was a big inning in there. Like, we know regionals can go down some weird roads, but I was Texas being that close to Omaha last year. I thought David Pearson and their staff did an incredible job to pull that off.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting last fall, watching them kind of build their pieces around the roster that they had, and then all the transfers they brought in. It was like, man, there's a lot of potential here, and if they hit the stride, like, they could be really good. But if they don't hit their stride, this could be Oklahoma of 2021 when Skip tried to bring in a bunch of transfers and it just all imploded on him because no one could kind of gel and they had injuries. And so by all means, one of David Pierce's best jobs for sure, coaching the team. It'll be interesting to see how that carries over, because now we can really say, look, if we think that squad was good, we know the squad's that much better. And now we have these pieces that were said, we're really hungry. We shouldn't have missed College World Series maybe last year. Like, let's go attack. And it'll be interesting to see how some of those guys develop.
Yeah, and LeBaron Johnson down the stretch last year, he was, I can't think of a pitcher not named Paul Skeens that I would have wanted to face less than LBJ. Yeah. I mean, he was, downhill, touching 96, wicked breaking ball, split finger. I mean, man, like, you talk about an uncomfortable at bat. He is an uncomfortable at bat.
Yeah, it was for LBJ. We saw glimpses of it, right? That 6-inning performance or 5-inning performance against LSU when LSU visited Texas earlier in the season.
Midweek game, right? Yeah.
And we were like, okay, this could be something real. And then he kind of faltered a little bit and kind of picked himself up. And yeah, I mean, the Miami coach afterwards was just like, I don't know what just hit us. Like, we just got buzzsawed by a magician. So
Right.
he was must watch TV for sure at the end of the season.
No doubt.
So, well, Runes, I appreciate your time. Thank you for having on. Can't wait to maybe run into you this fall and definitely next season. And looking forward to some more content from you and thoughts. So
Yeah, good stuff, man. Keep up the great work. Same here. I always enjoy crossing paths with you. So good stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks y'all for listening.